Welcome back, everyone. Our next session will be led by Ms. Sungdo Kim, attorney at law at Mission Law Firm, and we will be discussing the roles of Korean startups and blended finance in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. It's great to see some of the panelists here once again from last year. I think last year we had a wonderful time with these panelists, and I'm looking very forward to this discussion. Sungdo, the floor is yours.
안녕하세요. I'm going to just so that everybody can speak freely. 안녕하세요. 저는 role of Korean startups and blended finance.
Good afternoon. As I've been introduced, I am the moderator for the session titled Roles of Korean Startups and Extended Finance in Achieving SDGs. I am attorney at law at Mission Law Firm. It's already been 10 years since we launched the SDGs, and we are in the mid-2020s. And I believe that the precondition to achieving goals, any goal, is the sustainability of Earth. And I don't think we have had enough time to take a deep dive into this topic, and so we have a list of great panelists for this discussion. We will now go to Ms. Kim Hae-won for her self-introduction. I am from KOICA, and I am Kim Hae-won, a Director of Private Sector Engagement Team at KOICA. It is indeed a great honor for me to participate on this great panel. In 2009, I joined KOICA, and I started with the Project Innovation Team, and currently I am the Director for Private Sector Engagement. And so CTS, IPS, IBS, SMEs, large companies, and impact investments are all under our belt, and it's been 6 years since I have been on this team. Great pleasure to meet you. Next, we have with us Professor Kim Bu-yeol. I am Kim Bu-yeol, Associate Professor at Seoul National University. I study social innovations and sustainable development at the Graduate School of Environmental Studies. Social ventures and social companies continue to be fostered by PPL. Next, we have Ms. Lee Hae-jin from GCF. A great pleasure to meet you, and it's a great pleasure to be able to join this great panel. I am Lee Hae-jin from the Green Climate Fund. Green Climate Fund is the financial mechanism for the UN Environmental Treaty, and we are one of the largest multilateral organizations, and we are headquartered in Songdo here in Korea. Thank you. Next, Mr. Park Yong-jin. I am from Ernst & Young, and I am a partner there, and I'm in charge of climate change and sustainability services. Currently, I provide consulting to large companies related to RE100, net zero strategies, as well as ESG strategies. Before joining EY, I worked at LG for 15 years, and I worked on carbon emission projects and LED as well as PV projects, and I worked on planning new projects, and I was also the head of LG Group's CSR. It's a great pleasure to meet you here today, and it will be a great opportunity for us to discuss climate technologies from a corporate perspective. Thank you very much. Last but not least, Honorable Kim Young-kyung. A pleasure to meet you. I am from 60 Hertz. It's a virtual power plant, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer at 60 Hertz. My name is Eunice Young-kyung Kim. Last summer, I joined 60 Hertz, and before that, for over 2 decades, I have worked on financial investments, and I have worked in the financial sector for 2 decades. I also worked at a venture capital company just before joining 60 Hertz, and I was in charge of the energy sector. And I had an opportunity to work with 60 Hertz and research 60 Hertz. And I found 60 Hertz very interesting, and I was invited by the CEO to join 60 Hertz. I'm sure that you have heard in the media that climate crisis is quite severe, and so we need to have decentralized, eco-friendly power systems in terms of generation. And 60 Hertz is a VPP software operation company, and we have the goal of working with various energy sources to connect them with end customers. Pleasure to meet you. Thank you very much. Everyone spoke very briefly about their career, but you will be able to see in the proceedings the long list of career opportunities that our panelists had enjoyed throughout their lives. Well, let me give you a question as an icebreaker. Let's start with Director Kim Young-kyung first. When we talk about climate crisis, is there a particular turning point that made you interested in climate crisis? Well, I have been interested in the environment for a very long time. In the 1990s, I studied here at Yonsei, and I graduated from the Department of German Language and Literature. And in the mid-90s, I went to Germany to study. And already in the mid-90s, Germany was very prominent about environment. When I would go to grocery stores, they would ask me if I wanted a paper bag instead of a plastic bag. And there were activities to use reusable bags, and that was quite shocking for me. Well, we are amongst the advanced countries now, but in the mid-90s, people really didn't know where Korea was on the map. And so in terms of the environment, we had many aspects that were closer to developing countries. And so that was quite shocking in the 1990s that I had to pay for a plastic bag, and I was there for about 2 months to study German, and they were already separating their garbage for recycling, and glass was actually separated by color at that time, and it was quite a shock for me. So that was a turning point for me to become interested in the environment. I was only there for 2 months, but when I came back to Korea, I tried to make efforts to become more sensitive to environmental issues. And I did forget about the environment after coming to Korea, but I had another turning point because just before joining venture capital companies, I had an opportunity to translate books on ESG impact. And the key word that is threaded throughout the book, as Attorney Kim has mentioned, is sustainability. And so sustainability is the key word for ESG impact. And so the book that I was translating talked about ESG and impact and investments. And these ESG impact investments not only have financial returns, but also societal and environmental results. And so because I was able to translate this book, I became more interested in environmental performance. And in terms of areas of expertise, I provided consulting in areas such as circular economy and future energy sources. And so I decided that this may be a promising field, and that made me more interested in this topic. Thank you for being quite frank. I'm sure that you were quite shocked that she looks so young, but nevertheless, she talked about the 1990s. And you can see that she has rich experience under her belt, and she's able to share those insights with us based on those experiences. Next, let's go to Mr. Park. When did you start to be interested in climate crisis?
So also, I'll go back to the 1990s. That's when I started my master's program. That was back in 1999. And as you can see in my bio, I studied physics. So when I was selecting my major for my master's program, that was in December of 1997, we were hit by the Asian financial crisis. It was a difficult time, but back then there was a Kyoto Protocol. We reached an agreement for the Kyoto Protocol, and that was in December of 1997. In 1996, I was in my undergrad years, and then the next year I started my graduate program. And I was thinking about what I should do. Before that, I was thinking about my major, and then I went on to nuclear fusion physics. And that really established and set the trajectory of my career. So since then, I have been continuously laying the foundation towards science and technology and towards environment. So I think that turning point was the Kyoto Protocol. I can say that. Yes. So that was actually a major turning point. You were talking about money, and then all of a sudden, a Kyoto Protocol. Wow. So how about Miss Lee? How did you start to take interest in climate change? You've also worked at the World Bank, and now you're working for the GCF, the Green Climate Fund. So can you tell us your turning point? Well, I have to recall back to the years when I was a little bit younger than now. I used to work in the private sector. I was working for a foreign bank, an international bank here in Korea, and I was interested in international organizations back then. And then I was looking in this relevant field, international development, and there are many different sections or sectors within international development, for example, SDG related, poverty eradication, and healthcare. But among them, I wasn't that interested in climate change. But then I was in the East Coast, and that was when the U.S. was hit by Hurricane Sandy. And that was when Wall Street was flooded, and there was a standstill. Everything was halted, and the bridges, the streets were just inundated with water. And I could see that even though humans are advanced in many different fields, if we are hit by nature, climate disasters, there's nothing that we can do, and this has a major impact on society. So I thought that it would be great to use the skills that I've developed in this area, and that's how I started to work in this field. Okay, wow, that's enormous. So we were talking about money, and then Kyoto Protocol, and then hurricane. Then how about Dr. Kim? How about you? Well, I've majored in developmental economics, and Malawi in Southern Africa, and then Ethiopia in Eastern Africa, and Ghana, and also in South Asia, Myanmar, and Cambodia. Well, I've been engaged in various poverty eradication programs and also education programs for girls. Well, I have a lot of experience in field experiments related to developmental economics. And then starting in I started to work at the graduate school environmental studies, and I could see that I was a person who was less knowledgeable in this field, least knowledgeable. The name of the graduate school was Graduate School Environmental Studies, and so that's when I started to take interest in the area of climate change. So if you look at my office, well, there are two experts in the field. They're scientists of climate change, so I have a chance to learn a lot from them. Well, thank you very much. So now it's time to listen to Ms. Kim, Director Kim. What was your turning point to take interest in climate change? Well, there were two, actually. And like Professor Kim said, I did my master's program and my undergrad at the School of Environmental Studies. And I think it was one of the classes that he taught, I think. But there was a project, the assignment that I had to do. I had to personally experience the impact of climate change and write a paper on that. So that's when I started to take interest in climate change. And then, as it was mentioned by CSO Eunice Young Kim, Well, in my field of work, we have been searching for good, solid startups. And VCs, I could see that they actually search for and source these promising startups and invest in them. And Koika actually has a specialized model to work with the large corporations and to actually apply ESG to further develop a society and also to implement the SDGs. And in that process, I was able to learn more about climate change. And so Koika and other development assisting agencies are increasingly learning about climate change and the relevant issues and the role that we can play. Yes, and so I'm going to ask the same question to myself. And perhaps this might be the softest answer, but I actually had worked with Director Kim at Koika. I worked at Koika for 10 years. And then I worked with the Gates Foundation for creating the Rex Foundation. And the field that I was mainly interested in was actually global healthcare. And also I was interested in mother-child health. But I myself had difficulty having a child. But about 3.5 years ago, I gave birth to a wonderful, beautiful child. And my child is very interested in color and also dance. And starting from 2 years old, my child is very good at identifying color in Korean and English. But up till now, there is one color that my child is difficult discerning, and that is the color of the sky blue. When I say sky blue, my child points to the color brown. And I thought, why is this? Is he colorblind? I thought. But no, that was not it. He's very good at pointing out the color red and other colors. So I thought, why is my child having difficulty identifying the color sky blue? And it just hit me that my child lives in an environment where it's not often that you get to see a really clear sky in the color blue, because he was born in the COVID pandemic period. So my child is used to looking up at the sky and everything so gloomy and dark and brown. So that's when it really hit me that we are living in an era of climate change. And my child, for the rest of his life, might end up looking up at the sky and looking at a very brownish, dark sky. So that's when it really hit me that we are living in a very dark, gloomy era of climate change. I have a lot of questions that I would like to ask each and every one of you. But we do have this grand theme that we have to cover. So I would like to ask the first question to Mr. Park. So climate change is not an issue or a challenge of the future. And in order to resolve this issue or the challenge of climate change, we talk about climate tech within the business sector and also around you. I'm sure that you have been looking for the solutions towards climate change and also looking at the various climate techs. But what is the perception within the business sector in terms of solving climate change, and what's the development in relation to climate tech? Yes, well, within the business sector, they look at the bottom line, right? Whether this will make profit. And also, is this related to regulation? Do they have to do this? Whether it's about regulation or whether this is profitable. Also, is this related to risk that is manageable? Now, businesses look at the issue from these three perspectives. And when it comes to climate tech, I think from my perspective, I think that the businesses look at it from two sides. First of all, profitability. Well, climate tech, there are many different sides to it, but then there is the carbon storage, and for that, there's a lot of technology required. So Hyundai, Heavy Industry, SK Innovation. Well, there were 5 entities, including myself, that gathered together yesterday to look at the CSS technology. And people were saying that a lot of money is required for carbon capture and storage business, and that the government needs to provide financial support to how much extent. And so we were talking about those issues. When it comes to climate tech, there's an extensive amount of budget that is required. That's the number one issue that's being talked about. And the number two, if you indeed inject that much money and you invest that much money, and then there's a lot of different risks and uncertainties associated that you have to manage, then what would be the return coming out of that? You have to make money. So if you do invest in climate tech, there's the people who put the money in it, and then of course there's a benefits coming out from it. But are these aligned together? If not, then this cannot be a business model. So let's say that I've made the investment and it was great for the benefit of humanity, but if I make no money out of it, that doesn't make sense for the business side. That's the reality. So first of all, it requires a lot of money. And number two, there's a lot of risks and uncertainties associated. Despite that, the investment has been made, but will I be able to get something out of it? Will there be a ROI? That's the major concerns of the business side. Yes, so rather than a rosy picture, you talked about the current reality of the business side, that it requires a lot of money, they want some financial support from the government, and they're concerned whether they will be able to enjoy a ROI. So Eunice said this as well, that you like things that can make money. But it requires a lot of money to start this business. That's the perspective or the position of the business sector. The governments and also the international organizations and the private sector foundations, I know, are making a lot of efforts to promote this issue. For example, the SDGs, it's been 10 years since the SDGs have been launched. So having said that, Director Kim Hae-won at KOICA, has there been any efforts made by the government side to actually help the private sector to develop climate tech? Any examples? Well, because KOICA is a ODA agency, and our funds are based 100% on tax, we provide support to the businesses, but there are different characteristics to the support that we provide. For example, when we utilize the innovative technology of startups and provide support to the developing countries, we provide support so that these climate tech can be developed and used in these developing countries. So, for example, purification technology or eco-friendly engines for eco-friendly cars. So we might provide support to develop such solutions. That might be something that we do. And also, like Mr. Park said, if there are large corporations that are investing, that want to invest in new technologies, and usually from the supply chain management perspective, there are infrastructures being built in the developing countries. In those cases, if there are opportunities for ODAs to play a role in the infrastructure development, then we might play a role in working with the businesses. And also among the ESG initiatives that we've recently launched, we have worked with Samsung Electronics to use Samsung Electronics Galaxy in Africa to use their phones for educational purposes to promote innovation in these African countries. So this is from a circular economy perspective, and we work with MIT on this project. And also with Kolong, we work with used textile. We recycle such used textile, and this is related to S among the ESG. And this is linked with the global supply chain as well. So there are various programs that we have. But the large corporations, compared to the SMEs, they're in a better position. But if we look at the solutions related to climate that we've supported, well, we know that we have to further spread and have the solutions scale. And there are challenges throughout the way. And even if the technologies of the startups are developed, personally, I feel that it's unfortunate that these technologies are not spread more or disseminated more. So in order to have these technologies be further disseminated, the government can play a role, reach an agreement with other countries, or, for example, there can be many different mechanisms. For example, within the CDM, there has to be many global issues that have to be resolved in order for the startups in the business sector to really see their technologies be disseminated and also for the costs or the burdens for them be eased. But these are the challenges that has to be solved going forward.
Thank you very much. With government support, it seems that many programs are already ongoing. Of course, we do need government support, but I don't think it should be just up to the government. Just like companies cannot do things on their own, this is the same for governments as well. So from that perspective, I do believe that the private sector is also motivated to create funds, one of which is being led by Professor Kim Bo-yeol. So could you share with us an example? Well, Mr. Yongjin Park talked about how companies need to have profits from their investments. So return on investment is always important for companies. Investing in climate means that it calls for a large investment and the risks are high. Large companies, I think they have CSR budgets that they're not too hung up on ROI for. CSR expenses can be used in smarter ways. At the SK Group from 2015, they have worked with startup companies that have environmental results. And so they have a project called Social Progress Credit. It's been 10 years since SK Group has continued with this project. And during the last 9 years, for companies with such results, 68 billion won was provided as cash incentives. This came from CSR budget. So the CSR budget was used to provide grants to startup companies with such environmental results. And LG Group also has a similar CSR project. LG Social Campus is the name of the project that is 13 years old. And I think LG had a great foresight. 13 years ago, LG decided that they're going to use CSR budget for eco-friendly startups. And so within the LG Social Campus, they discovered and fostered and incubated eco-friendly startups. The CSR team for LG Chemical and LG Electronics participates in this project, and about 200 startups have received support from this LG campus, and almost 20 billion won was provided as grants. Large companies have CSR budgets. Of course, companies can invest in technology to contribute to the environment, but CSR budget is relatively more free in terms of ROI scrutiny, and so this is something that we can utilize. Everyone on the panel today may be related to this example of Yuan Kimberly. Yuan Kimberly's CSR budget will be invested into the organization that I work for, and it is a donation, and it was 2 billion. And we created a green impact fund out of that donation. So for startups that are promising and that have great environmental potential will receive funds. And 60 Hertz is one of the companies that we invested in through the fund. And we believe that 60 Hertz has the highest potential for environmental impact. and we actually make an equity investment into these companies. And so we have creative ways of fostering eco-friendly startups in this way. Thank you very much. Well, you can see that we have a great network within the panel. And what is quite amazing is that before we had this panel, I think there was only 2 occasions when we gathered together. But we became one under the topic of climate. Next, we will go to Lee-Jin. So we are talking about climate crisis and climate tech. And could you share with us projects or examples from GCF? Projects that include either startups, or you can also share examples of working with the private sector, any private sector engagement projects. What are some of the ongoing projects? We would like to listen to your example. Well, many people on the panel talked about the role of the private sector, and as a background, I would like to share why the private sector should participate in climate action. The biggest reason is because the funds from the public sector is not enough. Developing countries need $2 to $4 trillion every year to solve the climate issue. That type of mobilization cannot be done by the government alone. And so, how are we going to combine private and public funds to create funds of scale so that it can contribute to solving climate issues across the world? That is why we are talking about blended finance. At GCF, the Private Sector Investment Division always focuses on this concept of blended finance. The reason I have prepared this slide is because there are so many actors and institutions that are already participating in this picture, but each organization have different risk tolerance levels and also average ticket size. So you can see that the x-axis is the average ticket size and the y-axis is the risk tolerance. And if you take a look at the upper left corner, you can see that these are the organizations that have high risk tolerance but have small average ticket sizes. And on the lower right side, you have organizations that have large ticket sizes with low risk tolerances. These are organizations that like to invest in less risky projects. GCF is a partner organization, and there are about 200 organizations that we directly work with. And we also work with co-financiers. KOICA, where Kim Hae-won is associated with, also works with Green Climate Fund. Institutional investors, they have low risk tolerance because they have shareholders and they need to receive risk ratings. And so they cannot participate in risky projects. But GCF also has risk capital that can be mobilized for these projects. That would mean that we can combine or blend GCF funds with institutional investors to effectively invest in appropriate projects at a larger scale. We have invested 14 billion won cumulatively, and currently we have projects that are worth 54 billion won, $54 billion. Well, you don't need to be too focused on this picture at the moment. One of the models of blended finance is related to climate adjustment, environment, and agricultural fund. When we launched the agricultural fund, there were not many funds that were focused on climate change, and there were no funds that were focused on frontier markets such as Africa. But we provided risk capital so that we can blend the fund, and the fund is worth about $60 billion. And we thought maybe at the most 58 billion, but it has grown to 60 billion. And we are now investing with 10 companies. One of the companies is a company headquartered in Kenya, and they are a company that provide water pumps to farmers in Kenya. This company sent us this picture from one farm. You can see that it's a corn farm, and you can see a solar pump for the left side, and the solar pump is used to provide irrigation. And on the right side, you can see crops dying because of the lack of water. In Kenya and in many of the African areas, the amount of rainfall has a direct impact on agricultural yield, and so that is why irrigation is very important. And when there are different weather conditions, they need to be able to continue to grow their crops and harvest so that it can become an economic income for the farmers. And so that is why we are investing in this Kenyan company. The irrigation system is connected to solar panels. And so in the past, diesel power was used to bring water from rivers that were far away, but now solar panels are used for irrigation so that it does not consume fossil fuels, nor do they emit carbon. You can see the clear results, and other villagers also wish to use these services because they are now well aware of the difference that it makes. And according to survey, 90% of the customers were satisfied. They answered that their quality of life was enhanced. And they also mentioned that their ability to adjust to the climate change has also been advanced. So if we invest in these companies, it has a great impact. But can we say that the return on the investment is also great? That's actually still an open question. The revenue of this company grew by 2 to 3-fold, and our target return is double digits. We invested in Series A, and now they are close to completing Series B. Companies like the company that you see on the picture, we hope will not go through difficulties in finding financing, because we hope to continue to finance these companies through our blended finance model. Well, this is a picture that I also want to share with you. This is a picture from another fund in East Africa and West Africa, and in Sub-Saharan Africa. Unlike Korea, they have the lack of electricity. In Korea, electricity penetration is 100%, but it's mostly 50% in Africa. And in remote villages, sometimes it's only 1%. So we have provided solar home systems so that families can enjoy lighting during the night and also charge their cell phones. So we are able to hear of these great impact stories. The children here are enjoying the solar home system to do homework at night, and shops are able to keep their doors open for longer hours. And we have seen in survey results that they're very satisfied with these services. This is a way for us to accelerate transition to cleaner energy, but at the same time, blended finance can be used in other sectors to make sure that we help people adjust to climate change. Thank you very much for sharing those examples. I can see that many people are playing multiple roles to make these stories come true. When you first started, you talked about how it's been 10 years, but you mentioned whether this is worth the investment. Mr. Park, you talked about how we made investments, but are there return on investments? So I did have some concerns about whether we can find the answer, but it seems that we are almost close to the answer. Maybe Director Kim Young-kyung can actually lead us to the answers. So you are a part of a startup company that is focused on climate tech. Could you share with us the projects conducted by 60 Hertz? And in your explanation, could you also talk about your experience in impact investment? I do hope that you can share those two stories with us.
Yes, I might speak a bit too long, but nevertheless, let me try. I personally know Sungdo and also Mr. Park. The other people here on stage, well, because we work in the same ecosystem, we seem to be connected somehow. Before I give you my reply, I want to say that I was listening to the other people speak, and I don't think I can give you the exact answer to your question, but I would like to give you my 2 cents. I said that I joined this company because I thought that this would work and make money. And I will explain why I think so later on. And also Hejin, she mentioned that this is an open question whether this will indeed make profit. And when engaging in impact investment, that was a question that was constantly on my mind. In the long term, of course, it can be profitable, it may not. But when we think about that question, we have to also think about whether economic value is the only value that we should think about. And I'm sure that a lot of the people in the audience already know this, because SK, they keep on talking about the double bottom line, or is it dual bottom line? There is this concept. There's the economic value, and at the same time, there's a social value. So we have to evaluate and assess these two different values at the same time. So when we think about whether we are making value, it's not just about the monetary value, but we also have to think about the social value. And there will be one day in the future when all of us think about these dual values. So because of climate change, we are in an increasingly challenging situation. We talk about how the temperature is rising by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And even if there is not a temperature rise, we have to think about the savings. And saving equals the economic value, and it also equals the social value. So the panelists mentioned a lot of good things, and I also want to say that I too have thought about these issues, and I would like to give you my thoughts on these issues. First of all, the role of the startups in terms of achieving the SDGs. Well, on this question, I think that if we look around the world today, in short, I believe that climate is eating the world. And there may be people who are familiar with this title, where climate is eating up the world. Climate is dominating the world. Climate is really eating up the world. And what does this mean? Well, you may be familiar with this phrase, but back in 2011, Alexander Horowitz, this person runs a really big company in the venture capital field in San Francisco. And this person, well, he wrote a commentary on the Wall Street Journal saying that software is eating the world. What does this mean? It means that all companies have to actually be a software company. And Ben Evans, who was a director of that company back in 2014, I think that it was a tech summit back in 2014, said that mobile is eating the world, meaning that mobile will really drive fundamental change around the world. And at that time, I thought that that title, that catchphrase, was really interesting. And now I think that climate is taking the place of climate and mobile, and climate is really eating up the world today. And all companies have to become a climate company. It might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I think that is how we can explain the world today. Up till now, we lived in a world of capitalism, but now we're living in a world of new normal. And this new normal is about climate and also ESG. So if you look at capitalism, at the center are the businesses, and Now, businesses have to really adjust themselves to the new normal. Around the world, investors are focusing on the climate issue. And in Korea also, there are 5 different sectors of climate tech. There's clean tech, there's carbon tech. In the case of our company, we are part of the clean tech sector. And then there's the eco tech, which is about garbage and circular economy. And then there's a geotech, which is about satellite and also how that can be used for growing crops. So there's geotech and then there's food tech. There are 5 different sectors, and among the 5, I believe that businesses will have to take part in at least one of the 5 because, like I said, businesses are at the core of capitalism, and the businesses have to really adjust to the new normal of capitalism. And the public market, which means the listed companies, and then there's a private market, which would include a lot of the startup companies. So public and the private market is now making more demands in relation to the climate tech. So this has become really essential. So then, what would be the role of startups against this backdrop? As it was mentioned by Professor Kim Boo-yeol, Yuhan Kimberly created Green Impact Fund, and investment was made into 60 Hertz. And so there's a 1% stake held because of this investment. And then Hyundai ENC and also Hyundai Motors. These companies, actually, large corporations, are shareholders. And in a world where renewable energy mix increases, I do believe that that's the future of the world that these large corporations envision, and that's why they've invested in our company. So, in accomplishing and achieving the SDGs, how is the role of startups different from the role that will be played by the large corporations? And also, how can startups achieve better than large corporations in this new world? Well, startups are agile. You probably heard this before. Compared to the large corporations, these giants, we have agility and we're good at innovation. These are our major characteristics. And also when it comes to these specific issues and when it comes to the small communities or the niche areas, we can take a deeper dive compared to the large corporations. So it's not just me, but a lot of the people involved in the startups can play an important role in achieving the SDGs. The startups and the people involved in the startups have great potential. And the startups can actually play a complementary role and work alongside with these large corporations within the ecosystem. And first of all, in terms of agility and innovation, a lot of the large corporations, well, they have their CVCs, the corporate venture capital. And these CVCs, when we categorize investors, there's the FIs and the SIs, the financial investors and the strategic investors. The financial investors, who are they? Well, the VCs are generally characterized as financial investors. They invest for the financial returns. And I, of course, because I was an impact investor, I looked at the impact result as well. But usually, the financial investors, they want to invest in the innovative technology. But when there are new innovative emerging technologies, they tend to monitor what's out there and they make the investments. But for the large corporations, they have the CVCs that they utilize and operate, and they utilize the CVCs to make investments into the innovative technologies. And Hyundai utilized their own internal CVCs to make investment in 60 Hertz. So once again, startups are more nimble, more agile, and we're more creative in some sense. So because of the agility, we can play a role in accomplishing the SDGs. And because of the agility, startups actually can play a role in terms of the environmental sustainability and also can be more swift and agile in coming up with the solutions for environmental sustainability. And also, we can target the niche market. There are a lot of startups that really target a specific niche market. Of course, there are startups that just hide in the niche market and they just end up there and dissolve. But I think that it's important to ensure that these niche markets become a main market. Anyhow, these startups has the expertise to a level that sometimes the large corporations cannot reach. And also, when it comes to the local communities, the startups can have a great influence over these local communities. Of course, the large corporations can have such influence as well. But when it comes to the appropriate or the right level of effectiveness, I think that these startups can really build themselves up and root themselves in these local communities and work with them within the communities and play a more effective role. And also, these startups can be more flexible in terms of collaboration because the large corporations, in order for them to play an active role, they may sometimes have some limitations in terms of the flexibility because there's a lot of different stakeholders. There's the NGOs, there's the academia, there's the government. And when trying to collaborate with all of these different stakeholders, it might be more easier for the startups to show greater flexibility and work with these diverse players. And last but not least, in terms of impact investment, well, I worked in impact investment field, but not that long. I worked for a long time as an equity analyst for a long time. And then, as it was mentioned before, we call this a patient capital because the results do not come out within a short period of time. That's why investors, aside from the financial profits or the financial value, they also look for the social values as well. And the large corporations, they do a lot of different things. Especially the chaebol, large corporations, they are involved in many different areas, whereas the startups, they're involved in a certain limited area. For example, when I was a venture capitalist, I could see that the startups, they had these very specific expertise. And for example, they had their specific BMs that they would point to. So anyhow, I think I've gone on for too long, but that's all I would like to say. Yes, thank you, Young. So, of course, the moderator's role is to summarize what the panelists say, but I think that Young has been very to the point, so there is no need for me to summarize. But anyhow, she did mention that we're living in an era of a new normal, and the businesses, unlike the past, and as it was mentioned by Mr. Park, well, I think in the past, the companies just looked at the monetary value or the financial value only. But unlike the past, now large corporations are looking beyond that. And large corporations are collaborating with startups. And indeed, we can see that these large corporations have really changed over the years. For example, I was part of the deep tech accelerator called Future Play. And as a lawyer, attorney, I provided a guideline for responsible ESG investment. And in 2020, ESG became a really big hot buzzword. And that was because BlackRock, Larry Pink, BlackRock is a very famous investment institution. And he sent out a message saying that you have to make sure that you if it's not a company that's socially responsible, that's not focusing on ESG, then we will not be investing in that company. And that's when the ESG really became an issue and garnered people's attention. Deep Tech Accelerator is a place that invents in promising technology, but future play have now realized that responsible investment is also important as well. And that's when it started to acknowledge the importance of ESG and also the changes within the Korean society as well, that there's a guideline coming out about responsible investment and ESG guidelines and etc. So we can see that the perception throughout the industries and also within our society is changing. As it was mentioned, it's not just the economic value, but also the social value and also governance-related values that are being emphasized these days. So thank you very much for all of your opinions and your comments. And also you've mentioned about the startups and the role that they can play in terms of achieving the SDGs and also the role of blended finance. So thank you very much.
감사드리고
Thank you very much for joining us. And this is the end of the panel that we have prepared. But allow me to wrap up. Al Gore has mentioned that climate crisis is not a problem, but it is an opportunity for us to make a better choice. Barack Obama also made this very famous statement: we are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change and the last generation to do something about it. So we are the generation, the first one to feel climate change, and we are also the last generation to do something about it. And so in the next 6 years, as we have worked very hard in the last 10 years, I hope that we will seize this opportunity and remember that we are the last generation to make changes. And so we need to look for solutions in innovative and creative ways. That really is the way forward. I hope that we can end on that note of hope. But if there are any questions from the floor, we will open the floor for questions. Good afternoon. I am an intern at KGCF, and it's a great opportunity for me to be here. I have a question for Ms. Kim Young-kyung. Well, Mr. Park has mentioned this before. So when we plan projects, although you did make a large investment, sometimes the companies do not benefit from those investments. When we find solutions for climate crisis, you mentioned that there are benefits, and companies, they may actually need to share those benefits with others. What is your opinion concerning this? That's a great question. When I was at an impact investment company, I always heard those questions. So we visit LPs and ask for investments. For example, we ask for investments at SK and Samsung, and they always ask the exact question that you asked. But I don't feel comfortable naming this specific company over and over again. But why is SK so proactive in this area? Well, I don't know if this is the best of example, but I think it's a great marketing tool. I think it was about 2 years ago, Hyundai department store located in Pangyo did not have high revenues, but I heard that Patagonia was the only brand whose revenues continue to increase. Well, I read the book about their brand, and it wasn't very interesting, so I didn't finish the book because the book was so full of people who were kind and good. Everyone here today, including myself, we are conscious of the environment. And of course, it's great to be good. But the older you get, you are not as naive as you used to be when you're younger. I do believe that things that go completely against self-interest cannot succeed. So companies, they are making investments because it benefits them, whether it be tangible or intangible benefits. That is why SK is working so hard in this area, and that's the same for other companies as well. Companies, we're not saying that they should do good for humankind. And I think it's best to say that it has financial benefits, but I don't think that that is completely true now and in the future. So what we do need to emphasize is that it does have a positive impact on reputation. This is important because people would say, SK, oh, that's a company that does this and that. Generation X, we may not care, but the MZs, they are very sensitive to that. And there are the generations that come after them, those who were born in the 2010s and 2020s. For them, it's a part of their everyday lives. And so if you don't recycle plastic, and people would say, why aren't you recycling plastic? And so recycling is already a part of their lives, and they take it for given. And the reason why Patagonia is doing so well is because of that. Because if you have that brand logo on your clothing, it shows that I care for the environment. Well, I'm not sure if people want to show that they are for the environment or if they're actually for the environment, but I think the end effect is the same. Reputation is not built overnight, and it's actually directly related to the revenues. Of course, I haven't written papers on that, but I'm sure that there's a positive correlation. And I think that's the answer that I can give you. I'm a capitalist, and so I don't know if companies would 100% agree with this, but as time goes by, we will realize in hindsight what a big issue climate change was and what a great opportunity it was for individuals and companies to come into the limelight. Well, I would like to add to that, as you have mentioned before, those who were born in 2000s and 2010s, if they see their parents not recycling, they would think that that's quite primitive. My child is 3.5, born in 2020. And my 3.5-year-old actually goes to the Koika daycare center, and she visited the environmental center run by Koika. She went there just once, but she can remember everything she heard on that field trip. And she said, all of the ice is melting on the North Pole. The Earth is becoming so hot that it's difficult for polar bears to live. And she was so saddened by those stories. And she tells me, you can't throw away plastic like that. The 3.5-year-old always tries to teach me about plastic. She says, I always have to take the top off because the top is a different color. So as you have mentioned, I think it's just around the corner. Those who were born in 2010 are already teenagers, and those born in 2020s, they will never purchase products that ruin the environment. We have to keep that in mind. And as investors, return on investment, we always think in terms of 7 to 8 years. And those kids born in 2010s, they will be the mainstream consumers when we are looking forward to the return on our investments. And so I do believe that the investment is worthy. I did miss something very important. Capitalists always like to mention that companies have no choice but to do this because in 2025, ESG reporting will be mandated, and in France, no, it wasn't France. I think it's EU overall, and even in the US, in either 2025 or 2026, a lot of the companies within the supply chain will be mandated to disclose carbon footprint, and they have RE100 related conditions. For example, if BMW is importing steel from Hyundai, then Hyundai has to comply with all of the environmental standards of Europe. So if we wish to export, and as we are an export-driven economy, we need to comply with all of the rules within the value chain and supply chain. So we have no choice.
Yes, so actually we have gone over time, but if there is a burning question, one last question, maybe we can take that before we close the session. Yes, thank you very much. This was a very impressive session. I am from Hanyang University and I'm in a PhD program developing a Korean satellite. There are different startups making satellites that I work with, and these companies, these startups, well, they are conducting a lot of research in terms of climate action, but from the diplomacy side, well, there are some unique Korean characteristics. And so, considering the characteristics of Korea, are there any areas or fields that Korean startups can really shine in or do better in? For example, in Japan, Japanese companies are actually developing satellites using wood because Japan is very strong in dealing with wood. So, having said that, are there any areas, promising areas that you can think of? Well, I worked in a VC company, but I've never looked into the satellite company before. Well, I have worked with the Ministry of SME and Startups, and well, there was a program about deep tech and a super gap, and starting from last year, we have been providing in-depth support to the startups, and there's a separate sector for the space area or sector that the government provides support for. And this is related to deep tech support or grants. So I understand that we are actually waiting for businesses to contact us. So if you give me a call, then I can give you more information. So, well, there was a QTech seminar that I participated in, and we talked about the range of QTech. For example, strategic semiconductors should be included, and semiconductors or satellites should be included in QTech. I'm not sure which part of satellites you're working on, but I understand that satellites are being utilized for analyzing climate-related information. And I understand that satellites are used for climate issues. I don't think there's a lot of talk about utilizing satellite in terms of the hardware. You talked about using trees because trees, it passes the microwaves, and also now we have micro-sized satellites, which is a really big benefit. So the hardware of satellites, I don't think there's a lot of talk about the hardware side in relation to the climate tech and also the monitoring for the forests and also agriculture related monitoring and also climate and disaster monitoring or climate forecasting. I know that these areas has been covered by climate tech, but your area and the satellite hardware related area has not been fully covered. So I'm not sure if this answered your question. Let me also answer your question. There may be some areas of climate tech that Korea can do better than other countries, but I don't think we necessarily has to have that kind of sector. Because, of course, there can be, if we use analogy of soccer, there can be players like Son Heung-min, but then there are other soccer players who don't really go pro or go into the European League. But these players, soccer players, can play in soccer matches in their local communities. Of course, it's important to play at the global level, but I think that there's a role that you can play in any level, including your local community. And if you look at YouTube, you can see that there are a lot of sports players, athletes, who actually are playing in the leagues within their local communities who earn a lot of money, and despite the fact that they haven't become a professional sports athlete. So I think that there's a way to contribute at all levels.
Those were interesting questions until the very end. I did not imagine that we would have questions on satellites, but we had a great answer to that question. It makes me very happy. This brings us to the end of our panel today. Thank you very much for joining us until the very end. Thank you.
Very much for the exciting panel. So a lot of our students are interested in startups. Unlike when we were going in college, we kind of were trained to go into, I'm not going to say a company name, but large size firms. But I think recently I've seen a lot of students interested in startups, and I think this session gave the students a new perspective on how startups can contribute to SDGs despite their smaller sizes and the diversity that they can bring. Thank you very much one more time. Okay, so we have concluded this session, and the next and final session at Grand Ballroom A will be held in 10 minutes at 15:40. Thank you.